Senator Kay Bailey Hutchinson of Texas, we wish you well in the near term, helping out with this search and rescue operation, and also in the long term as you deal with the investigation and the discussion which will follow in the months to come. Senator Kay Bailey Hutchinson from Dallas. We have been getting some emails all morning from people who saw various things, some of them with still photographs. Let's bring in one of those witnesses. Waylon Wagner from Henderson, Texas is with us now. Mr. Wagner, can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir, I can.
All right, if we could bring up your still image, which is on the computer in the control room there. We can take a look at the still image you captured. Tell me what you saw, heard, how you came to be outside with a camera.
Well, it was about 8 o'clock this morning, and I went outside on my patio just to have my coffee, like I normally do. And our house faces basically the south. And I was looking out toward kind of the northwest, and it was coming over our tree line, and it was just a very thin vapor line at that time. And I thought, wow, you know, what a beautiful meteor, you know. And we did not...
Mr. You did not know that it was the shuttle necessarily? You just
no, sir. Okay. We had gone out to eat last night, and we didn't know anything about the shuttle re-entering today.
I see. Okay, go ahead.
So... I was standing there, you know, and it just got bigger, and you could see more smoke coming off of it. And about that time, I hollered at my wife, and I said, come out here and look at this meteor, you know. And she ran out there, and she said, let me go get my camera. So she run back in and got her camera and took these pictures. Now, these pictures here are, you know, it might have been a minute or so after that, and these were more in the southeast when these pictures were taken. And then she's actually got some pictures of them, of the vapor trail as they went in behind the trees.
Did you hear anything, or was it so far away that you couldn't?
Do what?
Did you hear anything unusual, or was it so far away you couldn't hear anything unusual?
No. At this time, after we'd taken the pictures and everything, we hurried back into the house, and we had the Weather Channel on. And we thought, well, if it's a meteor, maybe they'll show something. And then the newscaster that was on had come on and read us the deal about the shuttle. Well, then we went immediately to your station, and then we saw it. And then just maybe a minute or a minute and a half, the house started rumbling.
Really?
And we're going, oh, no.
Wow.
You know.
Wow.
And
so the rumble sort of occurred sometime thereafter.
Yes, sir. We had already come back in the house and was watching the TV, and then we realized what it was the shuttle had re-entered and everything. And we stepped outside again and just listened to it. It was kind of like a big thundering noise, like a thundercloud would cause in the distance, and it just kept on and on and on. And we just kind of sat back down here at the TV and looked at each other, you know, and just all that.
So it might have just taken that much time for the sound to reach you, in other words.
Well, yeah, it was probably at least a minute, you know, minute to a minute and a half, and then we started hearing the sound of it.
All right. We're going to leave it at that. Waylon Wagner, Henderson, Texas, thank you for sending that image, which shows, to my way of counting, 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 5 distinct big pieces of the Space Shuttle Columbia at that moment in time over Henderson, Texas. CNN's Robert Novak sat down with the new NASA Administrator, Sean O'Keefe, just last week, had a lengthy interview with him, talked a lot about where he was headed. And one of the things that was uppermost on Sean O'Keefe's mind has been the announcement just now, a little more than a week old, of a new Educator Mission Specialist program. Really sort of the fulfillment of the Teacher in Space mission of Krista McAuliffe, Space Shuttle Challenger, 17 years ago. NASA finally getting to the stage where it was ready to begin thinking about flying teachers once again. Barbara Morgan, Krista McAuliffe's understudy, was due to fly at the end of this year, November. And additional teachers were encouraged to apply to fly in subsequent missions, about one a year for the foreseeable future. It was a time when, at least last week, when Bob Novak sat down with Sean O'Keefe, there was a lot of talk about bringing civilians into space. What else did he have to say, Bob?
Miles, I had mentioned to Administrator O'Keefe that the astronauts used to be household words, and people really didn't know the astronauts now, and I wondered if the lack of public interest and support in the space program was a problem of not knowing the astronauts and whether they should get to know them better. He mentioned then Barbara Morgan, and he also went on to say this, and this has a poignant sound now as we listen to it. Let's listen to what the Administrator O'Keefe said.
We also need to get to know a lot more about, again, guys like Ken Bowersox or Rick Husband, the guy who is the commander of the current expedition that's underway right now. Those are the kinds of folks that we, I think, ought to admire, look up to, and realize the extraordinary capabilities they have and the sacrifice that they make each and every day on our behalf as explorers. It really is an extraordinary group of people.
Of course, we now get to know these people much better with this tragedy, Miles. And the Administrator O'Keefe, who is not a space expert at all, he was brought in there because he's a great numbers cruncher, he's a good management man, former Secretary of the Navy, he was deputy man at the Office of Management and Budget, trying to make do with kind of short rations for NASA, trying to increase public support. Now he's got even a bigger task, and that is to explain to Congress and indeed to the nation what happened today. And there will undoubtedly be people, naysayers will say manned space is too risky, but as Senator Hutchinson said, and I'm sure, I know that Sean O'Keefe will say that it is essential that we continue the manned space program.
CNN's Bob Novak, who had the last lengthy interview with Sean O'Keefe before we hear from him today. 1 p.m. Eastern, that's right about now, is when we expect to hear from him. We will bring it to you the moment it begins, but let's take an opportunity to recap. As we take a look at pictures captured by our affiliate WFAA, 9 a.m. Eastern Time, 8 a.m. local time, what you're seeing are the final moments of the Space Shuttle Columbia as it broke up into several pieces, at least 5 big ones that we are able to count, disintegrated at an altitude of 200,000 feet, traveling 12,500 miles an hour, some 15 or 16 minutes prior to its anticipated landing at the Kennedy Space Center. Crew of 7 aboard had conducted a 16-day science mission, traveled 6.5 million miles in the course of that, and had, by most accounts, a relatively flawless mission. The crew, led by Commander Rick Husband, featured Mark Brown, Laurel Clark, Kaplana Chawla, Willie McCool, the pilot, Mike Anderson, and Ilan Ramon, the first Israeli to fly in space. Featured a 16-day science mission where they conducted in excess of 80 separate experiments on themselves, on rodents, on all kinds of things, physical sciences, trying to learn more about how microgravity affects human beings as well as other phenomenon. By all accounts, it was a successful scientific run, and then inexplicably, at 9 a.m. Eastern, just about that time that tape was shot, we lost communication. Now, let me just tell you how a shuttle, oh, this is a little different than I'm sorry, this anticipated something else. It was coming in this way across Texas, right about this point is where the breakup occurred. Should have continued down right along the rim of the Gulf Coast there, through the panhandle of Florida and down into the Orlando area, and make a steep right turn to runway 33 at the Kennedy Space Center. That was the altitude and speed at the time of the breakup. Tremendous forces on a shuttle. The whole process of a deorbit burn begins in the Indian Ocean when they fire rockets which slow the shuttle down just enough for it to begin falling out of orbit. The shuttle essentially is in a constant free fall around the planet at 17,500 miles an hour, sort of the perfect balance between its speed and the forces of gravity. Slows it down just enough to begin that precipitous drop. It begins a series of broad S-turns to dissipate heat, or to trade, I should say, speed for heat. It's covered with thermal insulating tiles, which are designed to protect the aluminum frame of the shuttle from that tremendous heat, which can exceed 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Those tiles are a very fragile thing, which have caused a lot of maintenance headaches over the years for NASA as it tries to keep the space shuttle fleet flying now into its 22nd year. All right, we have CNN's Gary Tuchman on the scene at the Kennedy Space Center, right near where that press conference with the NASA Administrator Sean O'Keefe is set to begin. Gary, I know you're just kind of hitting the ground running there, but if you can give me a sense of what the scene is like.
Miles, as you might expect, it's a very difficult, sad, and confusing time for the employees and visitors here at the Kennedy Space Center. I just spent some time about 30 minutes ago at the Visitor Center where tourists come, and Saturday is a very busy tourist day here at the Space Center. And there's a huge flagpole with the American flag flying at half-staff at the Visitor Center. And I saw a family, a husband, wife, and their 2 children stepping out of their car to go on the tour of the Kennedy Space Center. And there were a lot of people running around in the flag at half-staff, and the woman looked at me and saw I was with CNN and said, "What's going on here?" She had no idea what had happened. I quietly informed her what had happened, and she burst into tears. And that gives you an idea of what people are going through here. There are flags at half-staff throughout the complex. There's a sign, and you've probably seen this, Miles, when you've been at the Cape, when you drive in, and it tells you how many days it is until the next launch, how many days it is until the next landing. And it says 0 days until the next space shuttle landing. And it is a very eerie case of deja vu for a lot of us. I was here in 1986. At that point, I know you, Miles, worked in Tampa for a local station. I worked in West Palm Beach, and I was here that day after the Challenger exploded. And it's the very same terrifying, terrible feeling here of deja vu almost 2 decades later. Exact same week of the year, first day of February today, January 28th. 17 years ago, but it's a very sad day here at the Kennedy Space Center. Miles?
Gary Tuchman, thank you very much. As we look at this picture, which I believe came down a little while ago, the flag at half-staff there beside the countdown clock at the Kennedy Space Center. In the distance, you see Launch Pad 39A, which is exactly the point at which Columbia left the planet 16 days ago. About 3 miles from where that flag lies, sort of to the back of the camera, is the shuttle landing facility where it should have arrived 9:16 a.m. this morning. But as we have been telling you, that did not happen. It disintegrated shortly after losing communication with mission control over the state of Texas, somewhat ironically. Disintegrated into several pieces at high altitude and high speed, raining down debris over a huge, huge swath of Texas and into Louisiana. And there you see half-staff at the White House, live pictures there. This one from the North Lawn, as we see the nation in the earliest stages of beginning to mourn a brave crew of people who understood these risks and yet willingly, gladly embraced them. Let's send it over to Heidi Collins. We'll get another update for you. We want to let you know that the minute Sean O'Keefe begins talking, we'll bring it to you.
Yes, we will, Miles. We want to let everybody know. We're going to recap the details now of the tragic ending of the Space Shuttle Columbia mission, and what a tragedy it is. Here's what we know. NASA lost communication with Columbia just moments before it was scheduled to touch down in Florida at 9:16 Eastern this morning. Officials say they were given no indication of trouble. Meanwhile, television images captured the craft separating into pieces as it streaked across the Texas sky. An investigation began almost immediately to find out what happened. An official in Washington says an act of terrorism was considered highly unlikely. Spectators who went to Kennedy Space Center to see the shuttle landing were left waiting.
We're shocked. We're at a loss for words. We don't know what to think. We feel so sad and sorry for the families of people that have been lost. Just hope they're with God.
Search and rescue teams fanned out across south central Texas looking for debris from the spacecraft. Officials warn people to stay away from anything that might look like a piece of potentially hazardous wreckage. Among the 7 Columbia crew members, Commander Rick Husband was at the helm along with pilot William McCool. Colonel Ilan Ramon, Israel's first man in space. Also, payload commander Michael Anderson, mission specialists David Brown, Kalpana Chawla, and Dr. Laurel Clark. Miles, we're going to send it back over to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Heidi Collins, for offering a good recap for those of you who might just be joining us about what has turned out to be a tragic day, February 1st, 2003, the loss of the Space Shuttle Columbia. We are expecting a news conference from the NASA administrator, Sean O'Keefe, to talk about the picture you see on your screen right now, which is that stream of multiple fireballs, a couple explosions there. You see the puffs of smoke coming out of it as Columbia streaked across Texas about 9 a.m. Eastern this morning, losing communication with Mission Control right about the same time, doing exactly what you're seeing here, which is breaking up, in-flight breakup. And that is all we can tell you about what happened, because we don't have a lot of information in the early stages of things like this, of course. And of most current concern right now to officials is to secure the debris, which has rained down on a huge, huge swath of the United States from Texas into Louisiana, hundreds of miles of debris. And that debris, with its toxic brew associated with it, is to be avoided at all costs. Please let authorities know if you know of some, but please, by all means, don't touch it. You could hurt yourself badly, and we don't want that to happen on top of everything else that has happened today. Let's bring in Barbara Starr, our Pentagon correspondent, to see what, if anything, the Pentagon is aware of on this story. Barbara?
Miles, we can tell you now that U.S. military forces from Fort Hood, Texas, are moving into position. Fort Hood, Texas, just announcing that it has launched helicopters, 4 helicopters now in the air, participating in what they are calling a search and rescue mission. But of course, it is really search and recovery of the debris and the crew of Columbia. They tell us that this task force will be comprised of helicopters from several military elements at Fort Hood, Texas. As we said, 4 helicopters now in the air. They will also be accompanied by military police from the 89th Military Police Brigade at Fort Hood. We are told as they locate debris, military police will now move in and secure those debris sites. Fort Hood is also telling us this will be a 24/7 operation, that they will use their Black Hawk helicopters during the daylight hours to search for debris, and once darkness falls, they will move in with what are called Kiowa Warrior helicopters. These are helicopters, of course, with night vision capability and night vision sensors. Again, the military police will move in to secure the debris sites until the debris can be removed in a safe manner. We are also told that, coincidentally, this was a drill weekend for the Texas National Guard, that they have additional helicopters and personnel that are on standby, even a C-130 aircraft, and that they will move in once the order comes down. But so far, it is the elements from Fort Hood, Texas, and of course, quite coincidentally, Fort Hood this very weekend was getting organized to begin its deployment to the Persian Gulf for possible military operations against Iraq. Miles?
So, Barbara, the key point here is to try to preserve all this debris. And do you get the sense that there will be enough forces marshaled to this effort?
Yes, Fort Hood, Texas, to be quite clear, is a huge military installation in Texas, 42,000 personnel, and of course, the Texas National Guard has a lot of assets at its disposal, troops, vehicles, airborne assets. So between the governor of Texas activating any National Guard elements down there on a state level and any requests that NASA may make to the Pentagon here today, there should be plenty of capability to move into these various sites very quickly, secure them, and recover that debris.
All right,
Miles.
Barbara Starr, thank you very much, and stay close, please. I told you a little while ago that this was a tough week for NASA already. January 27th, 1967, the Apollo 1 fire. Gus Grissom, Ed White, Roger Chaffee. My apologies, I couldn't remember Chaffee's name a little while ago. It's been a long morning. Died in that fire. January 28th, 1986, the Challenger disaster. It exploding 70 some odd seconds after liftoff. On that anniversary, the 28th, the commander of the Columbia mission, Rick Husband, radioed down some words of remembrance.
Okay, well, then we've got an announcement that we'd like to make on behalf of the STS-107 crew. And it goes like this. It is today that we remember and honor the crews of Apollo 1 and Challenger. They made the ultimate sacrifice, giving their lives in service to their country and for all mankind. Their dedication and devotion to the exploration of space was an inspiration to each of us, and still motivates people around the world to achieve great things in service to others. As we orbit the Earth, we will join the entire NASA family for a moment of silence in their memory. Our thoughts and prayers go to their families as well.
Rick Husband, the commander of the Space Shuttle Columbia, on January 28th, 2003, commemorating the loss of Apollo 1 and Challenger, the ultimate sacrifice, as he put it. Jerry Lininger, shuttle veteran, man who spent a good deal of time aboard Mir, joining us now. It's hard to listen to those words, isn't it, Jerry?
Yeah, very hard. I think every astronaut feels the same way, though. You know, there's a lot of people that have gone before us, and the people have the courage to do the things that they did. They know the danger, and we're all proud of them.
What, you know, the risks are so well known to the astronauts and their families, and yet many Americans really don't have a sense of it, do they? I know you talk to people all the time. Do you get the sense that people had this feeling that it was almost a routine type of operation?
I think they do, Miles, and especially the re-entry. I think the liftoff people realize, wow, look at the power. They know it's a dangerous operation, but the re-entry, very dynamic. You're right on the edge of the envelope. You're bouncing hard, fireball around you. Any astronaut, any person that's ever been through that experience knows that you are very close to disaster, and it's just the nature of what we do out in space.
Well, what you're unleashing is this tremendous potential energy, and that clearly is the focus, gets a lot of people's attention, including even the layman would understand that that is a difficult thing. Let's talk about re-entry, though, for a moment. A time, as you say, when perhaps our guard is let down a little bit. It nevertheless, when you're going from 17,500 miles an hour over the Indian Ocean to 0 at the end of the runway, there's a lot of things happening in between, aren't there?
A lot of things happening. Shuttle is at the point of the problem today, is under computer control, and very fine computer control, and you sort of rock the shuttle back and forth as you come down during re-entry, and that sort of dissipates some of the heat, lets some of the stress off. But it's a very dynamic process, all starting with the shuttle actually going upside down and backwards, firing the engines, as you mentioned, halfway around the world, then getting wings level, and then starting to hit some of the atmosphere. And as you get lower and lower, you hit more and more atmosphere, and even though the speed is decreasing, you're hitting, you know, a wall, essentially, and you're diving down into it, and it really heats up. It's,
give us a sense of what that ride is like as you could do these big, broad S-turns. It's a very severe maneuver, isn't it?
The maneuver's not so severe. It's just the whole shuttle. I remember my first flight, the commander, who very experienced, Dick Richards, he as we're coming down, bouncing around, he turns around and looks at me, and his eyes are this big, and just says, "Wow, Jerry, isn't this, you know, wild ride?" And here's an experienced naval aviator off aircraft carriers all his life. So I think anyone, again, that experiences that, it is just one very dynamic ride. I said it sounded like a locomotive train going to run me down, you know, right behind me. And again, my first flight, I sort of looked over my shoulder to make sure it wasn't a train. And that's the normal re-entry. So, you know, if anything goes a little bit wrong, it can be tragic, and, you know, that's what happened today.
Well, and give us a sense, because while you're inside that flight deck and you're looking outside, you're seeing very conclusive evidence of the amount of heat which envelops a space shuttle.
It is all around you. You look out, actually, the back window, you could see it too, and it's sort of a collapsing, kind of a northern lights look. Everything very fluid, plasma moving around, and it is just, you know, orange, red, big fireball all around you. So, you know, obviously when things did not go well, and once one piece comes off and you lose control, there's a lot of dynamic pressure, a lot of heat. And that's what you saw in all the films that you're looking at, with the different segments coming off, heating up, and multiple explosions, if you will. That's just debris going through a heat tunnel.
Now, and the way that the orbiter's airframe is protected, it is, after all, made of aluminum, which would certainly melt in that if it encountered that level of heat. The way it is done is with lots of blankets, thermal blankets, but more importantly, especially on the bottom side, those black tiles, which are designed, they're ceramic, they're designed to absorb and shed the heat and protect the shuttle. It's kind of a fragile system in a sense, isn't it?
It is, Miles. If you ever felt one of those tiles, you know, it's an amazing thing. It kind of feels like a piece of styrofoam. It is that light. But you put a blowtorch on one end and you put your hand on the other side and you don't feel the heat. So, you know, the engineers came up with an incredible product there. And again, we don't know exactly what happened. All I can tell you, though, is the belly of the shuttle is well protected. But if you get in the wrong orientation at any moment during that re-entry, you are not protected on all sides. And so, you know, once you start coming apart, there's nothing you can do.
So what's a possibility then to look at would be if somehow the shuttle was not in the perfect ideal orientation for some reason. That obviously would be high on the list of things that investigators would probe.
I'm sure they'll look very closely at that. They'll also look at some better film. Hopefully we had some telescopes pointing that way. Usually you follow the shuttle in. You might be able to see that initial moment where things, you know, came apart. I think software, some of the control systems, guidance and control systems may have failed and get you in slightly the wrong orientation. The other thing you mentioned during liftoff, a piece of debris possibly hitting the shuttle. If you have a spot that's exposed to that extreme heat and it melts through the shell and then hits a control surface, you can get in trouble very quickly. All those things will be looked at very hard, I'm sure. Try to put the debris field together, try to look for clues and evidence to make sure it never happens again. And I guarantee the astronauts on board want us to keep pressing this thing and to keep going back to space and to make the improvements and not make their sacrifice something that's in vain. So I'm sure they want us to put the pieces together, figure out what went wrong, and press on.
We should remind our viewers that we're 20 minutes past the time appointed for Sean O'Keefe to speak. We do expect a statement from the NASA administrator from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, where he was to welcome back the crew any minute now. We will bring it to you the moment it begins. Looking over my shoulder, still not there yet. Jerry, as we get into this scenario of something falling off during ascent, we want to be careful because it is so early, and I hate to get too far down the road of speculation, but it is common knowledge that there was a piece that fell off that external tank, struck some portion of the... let's go. I'll tell you what, we're going to go to the press conference right now. Let's go to the Kennedy Space Center live now via NASA TV.
About STS 107, we will have no questions today, just a few brief remarks.
As indicated earlier, we'll make a statement today, and then at this point, and a little later this afternoon at about 3 o'clock Eastern Time, there'll be a full technical briefing conducted from the Johnson Space Center. So at this point, we're just going to give you the circumstances as we understand them leading up to this particular tragedy today. This is indeed a tragic day for the NASA family, for the families of the astronauts who flew on STS 107, and likewise tragic for the nation. Immediately upon indication of a loss of communications on STS 107, at a little after 9 a.m. this morning, we began our contingency plan to preserve all the information relative to the flight activities. I immediately advised the President and the Secretary of Homeland Security, Secretary Tom Ridge, at the point after landing was due to have occurred at 9:16. Spoke to them very briefly thereafter to advise that we had lost contact with the shuttle orbiter Columbia and STS 107 crew. They offered, the President specifically offered, full and immediate support to determine what the appropriate steps were thereafter to be taken. We then spent the next hour and a half working through the detail and information of what we have received, and Bill Reedy will walk you through the specifics of those operational and technical issues here in just a moment. Thereafter, we have met with the family members of the astronauts who were here at Kennedy Space Center and are soon to be departing back to Johnston, to Houston. The President has called and spoken to them to express our deepest national regrets. We have assured them that we will begin the process immediately to recover their loved ones and understand the cause of this tragedy. At this time, we have no indication that the mishap was caused by anything or anyone on the ground. We've assembled a mishap investigation team that immediately was assembled upon the point of past the stage in which the orbiter was to have landed here at Kennedy Space Center a little after 9:30, and that team in turn is coordinating on a regular basis on all the facts that are pertaining to this from the Johnson Space Center, and a rapid response team from here at the Kennedy Space Center, as well as participants from the Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. In addition to these internal efforts, we have also appointed a mishap investigation board, an external group of people who are independent from NASA, who will immediately be charged with the opportunity to look at all the information that was immediately locked down right after our absence of communications. Each of these individuals are safety and mission assurance related officials in other federal departments of the federal government, from the Air Force, from the Navy, from the Department of Transportation, and across the federal expanse. The investigation team will also be chaired by an individual contacted to serve who is external to the federal agencies, and will have the opportunity to coordinate all the information again from an external view. So we'll be conducting both the internal activity as well as an external review immediately to ascertain the causes and circumstances under which this tragedy occurred. We've pulled together all the federal agencies and local governments as well. In discussion several times this morning with Secretary Tom Ridge, the effort is heavily underway to coordinate an understanding of exactly where the orbiter path had taken it from West Texas towards the Kennedy Space Center here in Florida, and to make sure that the material on the ground is secured so that the investigation can begin promptly. We would urge anyone who believes they have discovered or found any material to stay away from it and to please contact local officials. The local first responder groups for emergency services and so forth have been authorized and directed by Secretary Tom Ridge to assist in all manner. The Federal Emergency Management Agency is coordinating that effort on part of the Department of Homeland Security. I was here this morning with the families of the astronauts and their friends. It started out as a pretty happy morning, awaiting the landing of STS-107. And we had highly anticipated their return because we couldn't wait to congratulate them for their extraordinary performance and their excellent efforts on the science mission on this very important flight. They dedicated their lives to pushing the scientific challenges for all of us here on Earth. And they dedicated themselves to that objective and did it with a happy heart, willingly, and with great enthusiasm. The loss of this valiant crew is something we will never be able to get over, and certainly the families of all of them, we have assured we will do everything we can possibly do to guarantee that they work their way through this horrific tragedy. We ask the members of the media to honor that too. To please respect their privacy and please understand the tragedy that they are going through at this time. We will help the media assure that be the case as well. We trust that the prayers of the nation will be with them and with their families. And again, a more courageous group of people you could not have hoped to know than the families of these crew members. And an extraordinary, extraordinary group of astronauts who gave their lives and did it in a way that they knew exactly the risk, but never, ever, do we ever want to see a circumstance where something like this could ever happen. And we diligently dedicate ourselves every single day to assuring these things don't occur. And when they do, we have to act responsibly, accountably, and that's exactly what we will do. To give you more of the operational detail of what has occurred here since 9 a.m. this morning. The Associate Administrator for Spaceflight, a former astronaut, retired captain of the United States Navy, former test flight pilot, Bill Reedy, who has commanded 2 separate missions previously and as an astronaut, and is now, again, our Associate Administrator for Spaceflight, has worked with me all morning, along with all of us here at Kennedy Space Center, to work through the details of the events as we know them and to present to you the facts that we understand them. Again, the technical details that are being worked very diligently now will be covered again at 3 p.m. this afternoon out of the Johnson Space Center. With that, let me turn it over to Captain Bill Reedy.
It's a truly difficult day for all of us. Many of us were standing alongside the runway waiting to celebrate their triumphant return after a 16-day science mission. I think you could tell from the downlink that they loved what they were doing and they thought what they were doing was extremely important, pushing back those boundaries in science. At 9 o'clock, we heard that they had lost data from the spacecraft, and it appears that that was at about 200,000 feet, about Mach 18. The loss of data was somewhere over north central Texas, and at the planned landing time of 9:16, we initiated our contingency action plan called the Rescue Coordination Center and initiated a search and rescue effort. Sadly, I think from the video that's available, it does not appear that there were any survivors. We have currently impounded all the data, including all the pre-flight certification of flight readiness for STS 107. And at this point, I'd have to say it's too early to speculate about the exact cause. Obviously, we're looking at all the data that we have available. Those people that have videos, those people that have still pictures, we'll urge you to contact NASA so that we can coordinate those things that might be available. And to reiterate what the administrator said, those people that may find debris, do not touch it, do not move it. Contact your local authorities, have them impound it and secure the area so that our technical specialists will be able to piece together the puzzle so that we can resolve what happened. Our immediate focus is on the crew families, and we spent some time with them. The president called. I'd have to say the families are bearing up with an incredible amount of dignity considering their loss. We all grieve for them. We all pray with them for the crew. But one thing came across loud and clear when visiting with them is they knew that the crew was absolutely dedicated to the mission that they were performing. And I think you could see that in the video downlink. They believed in what they were doing. And in the conversations with the crew and their families, they said that we must find what happened and fix it and move on. And we can't let their sacrifice be in vain. Today was a very stark reminder that this is a very risky endeavor, pushing back the frontiers in outer space, and after 113 flights, unfortunately, people have a tendency to look at it as something that is more or less routine. Well, I can assure you it is not. Each and every time I flew, each and every time my colleagues flew, we treated that with the respect that it deserved from a professional standpoint. And I have to say that as the one responsible for shuttle and station within the NASA, that I know that the people of NASA did everything possible preparing for this flight to make it as perfect as possible. My promise to the crew and to the crew families is that the investigation that we have just launched will find the cause, we'll fix it, and then we'll move on. Thank you.
And we know you all have questions, and we will have a news briefing at 3 o'clock, and we'll give you that opportunity at that time. Thank you.
We just heard finally there from Lisa Malone, Public Affairs Officer with the Kennedy Space Center at NASA. She was preceded by Bill Reedy, the Associated Administrator for Human Spaceflight, who was himself preceded by the Administrator of NASA, Sean O'Keefe, telling us where the investigation is headed and offering some reminders of the risks involved in all of this. An independent investigative team is already being assembled, which will look at this entire thing outside the federal government with some impartiality and come to some conclusions as to what might have caused Columbia to break up in flight over Texas, hurtling along at Mach 18, we now know, 200,000 feet. Bill Reedy saying, I can assure you we will find the cause, fix it, and we will move on. It was almost 3 years from the Challenger explosion to the return to flight, Space Shuttle Discovery. Just to put that in perspective for you, 2 years and a healthy dose of a third before NASA flew again. And these kinds of things, depending on what it is determined it is, do take that long before NASA and the country, for that matter, can feel comfortable with moving ahead with piloted space flight. The 113th mission of the Space Shuttle fleet, and the second now to end in catastrophe, this time at the end of the mission, not immediately after launch. We are going to hear additional technical information, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, and I don't know who exactly is going to be participating in that news conference, but we will, of course, bring you that. That's coming up an hour and a half from now. We've had an opportunity to isolate for you the precise moment when Mission Control first had a sense that there was a problem. The communication loss, the loss of data, so-called telemetry on those computer screens. If we have that ready to go, let's listen in to that moment, and you can see how the conversation played out.
Columbia continuing toward Florida, now approaching the New Mexico-Texas border. Altitude 40 miles. Speed 13,200 miles per hour. Range to touchdown 1,400 miles. The shuttle in the left bank with wings angled about 57 degrees to horizontal.
You're listening, by the way, to James Hartsfield, Public Affairs Officer.
And Columbia, Houston, we see your tire pressure messages, and we did not copy your last.
Roger.
That's it. Roger, and then mid-communication, nothing. Let's wait another moment here. Tire pressure will obviously be something we'll be looking at. Space shuttle tires are under tremendous high pressure. They're filled with nitrogen and inert gas. That might be one area where they will be exploring. As we've been telling you, one of the keys for those people in mission control and all of this is preservation of the data. The moment something like this happens, they're supposed to capture what exists on their screens, gather any notes, anything on paper, put it all together, box it up, and put it in a place where it can be ultimately viewed by those who will be leading this investigation. That process still continues at Mission Control in Houston. Matter of fact, we have a live picture there of Mission Control. You can see that they're still at their consoles there, long now after the loss of the space shuttle Columbia. Jerry Lininger, I hope you had an opportunity to hear Sean O'Keefe and Bill Reedy. Did you not?
Yes, I did. And, you know, Bill's a good guy, and I'm sure everyone's doing everything they can.
Yeah, that point about finding it, fixing it, and moving on. Can you, in this dark moment, can you offer some assurance that that is, in fact, going to happen?
Well, I think based on the people that I worked with at NASA and the whole organization, the professionalism that they show, you know, we got other people who are going to follow in their footsteps, and you don't want to repeat a day like today. And so I have 100% assurance in my heart that people are going to look at it as hard as they can and really try to get to the root of what caused this tragedy today.
Tire pressure indications. What are we, if should we do anything? Should we make anything of that, do you think?
You know, I think any abnormality that was, as you mentioned earlier, you know, the tile or an object hitting possibly the orbiter during launch, they're going to look through every part of that mission, any indication that there was some kind of problem. Tire pressure sounds like a minor thing, but perhaps not. I mean, the tires are protected, obviously, during re-entry. And if the tire pressure is increasing, you know, heat expands things. And so if that was the case, possibly there was a problem in that critical area. You know, well, you look at all the data, you look at anything slightly off, and you try to make sense of it.
If those tires were heated up, they exploded, certainly that would take the doors off and expose the underbody of the shuttle, which, of course, it would be extremely vulnerable at that point. Hydraulic lines going through there, that sort of thing.
That's correct, Miles. So again, if when you're trying to piece this thing together, you'll look at any abnormality, try to put the whole picture together, look at the debris. Unfortunately, the debris, of course, is going to have re-entered itself, so you're going to have a lot of molten metal, and it's going to be very hard to put those pieces back together. But you try to piece it together, and then you try to come up with what caused the problem. And as Bill Reedy just said, you fix it and you press on.
Let's talk for a moment, go back to the beginning of the mission, and this piece that apparently fell off, the external tank, whether it was a piece of ice or a piece of foam, maybe a little bit of both. I don't know if we still have that tape in the gate ready for air, but we can talk about it nonetheless. What happened was there was a piece that fell and struck the left wing. Without getting too far down the road here as well, that obviously is an area that will be looked at. They knew about it shortly after launch, looked at that, and determined after some excruciating analysis that there wasn't a great deal of concern, as best I could discern. I know you weren't plugged into the engineering analysis of that, but this is, in general, a big area of concern at NASA.
Sure. You know, if you've been to the pad, I know, Miles, but a lot of people don't appreciate the fact just the sound wave bouncing off the ground and back up can shake the shuttle and damage things. And so there's a flush of water, literally a flood of water that goes on underneath the launch pad, not to dissipate the heat, but to absorb some of the sound, because all that sound waves come back, could shake the shuttle. Ice forming on the external tank has been a problem in the past. That breaks loose during the flight, during liftoff. So all those things are looked at very carefully. The good news on that, I guess, is that they have some cameras positioned down there, very good cameras that are looking very closely. And again, the analysis 16 days ago was that it looks like it didn't do anything that's of concern. Bottom of the shuttle, you can't afford to lose a tile or two. It depends on the area. But you can get back in even with some tiles off if it's not in a critical area. So, you know, you look at it, but I'm sure they're going to re-examine that and look even harder now at that whole situation.
All right. Jerry, I would appreciate it if you could sit still for us for just a little bit, stay close. We're joined here in Atlanta by Randy Avera, who was an engineer with the shuttle program in the dark days of the Challenger era. Mr. Avera, good to have you with us.
Good to be here, Miles.
Take us back to those days, the investigation, the way the investigation was conducted, and try to relate that to what's happening right now.
Well, we were always working very hard to provide the most perfect orbiter and space shuttle vehicle for launch. A tremendous amount of test and checkout is involved, and of course training and crew readiness. And on the day of the crash, as today, everyone was very disappointed, very shocked and grieved. And you have to pick up your spirits and do the work. As John Young, one of the astronauts, the commander of the first mission, has always said, just do your job. And it's time now for NASA and the American people and people around the world that support space exploration to do our jobs. There's going to be a lot of forensic science that's going to be required to do a thorough investigation of this particular accident. And the Space Shuttle Orbiter is a very complex design of electrical, software, mechanical systems, and structures, and flight dynamics that are similar to the X-15 experimental aircraft that flew during the 1960s.
Of course, one key difference with the X-15 is the X-15's body itself was designed to sort of shed its heat. The shuttle has those tiles, and that's a little different system, isn't it?
It's a quite complex and integrated system. There are about 5 different types of insulators, high temperature, medium temperature, and low temperature capabilities of insulation. A breach of any of those insulators can cause immediate damage to the substrate or structure below that, and that would directly affect the margins of safety of the structure and the flight loads that are applied and what the stresses on the vehicle are. But it's important to realize that NASA has already executed a plan to look at the evidence, document the facts, bring in the laboratories and scientific equipment to do a thorough analysis to know exactly what the facts are. Speculation is the first step in being inaccurate, and we learned back in the very first days of the Challenger crash investigation that what we thought had happened with the main engines of the shuttle, the cryogenic hydrogen-oxygen engines in the rear of the orbiter, in fact were not the problem. And we also had wrong impressions about the fate of the crew as far as the crew module flight dynamics in a ballistic trajectory, and whether or not the crew was alive or had an opportunity, if they had the proper equipment, to do an ejection or bailout.
What do you think, we've said this earlier and it should be pointed out, there's no ejection system on the space shuttle. That was ruled impractical and too expensive early on in the program. There is a bailout technique which the crew performs and practices frequently in the course of their training, but in this case that was not an option, was it?
You're correct, Miles. In the first early flights, 5 or 6 flights of Columbia, there were 2 ejection seats, and the flight crews were limited to 2 astronaut pilots. Those were seats that are similar to the SR-71 Blackbird ejection seats. Those were decommissioned when the shuttle was deemed operational, and currently what we have is a system that, as a NASA engineer, I had worked on at Kennedy Space Center, the barber pole bailout system, but that system is really only good for orbiter flight modes where the wings are level and the airspeed is under 200 knots, under 250 knots. And that's for blowing the side hatch off of the orbiter crew module, deploying the telescoping barber pole, and then doing a one-at-a-time sequential bailout with parachutes on their backs of the crew. But at these very high altitudes and very high Mach numbers of Mach 18 at 12,000 feet, that's not practical or even reasonable.
And the pole is there to keep them simply, the person bailing out, from striking the leading edge of the wing. We should point out to our viewers that's why they slide down a pole. But this, as we say, not an option here. Randy, if you could just walk us through quickly, sort of in areas of, in your mind, a priority, if you were conducting this investigation, where you'd start looking first down the list of priorities.
Well, the first step is to secure the data in the centers of NASA centers around the country. That data is very important. Paperwork, digital data that could be recorded. Also to secure the crash site and to have no contamination whatsoever of that crash site. Weather could play a factor. We had the Atlantic Ocean, the salt water of the ocean and the currents dealing with debris on the surface of the Gulf Stream headed northbound and other debris that was down on the bottom of the ocean floor. So all of this apparently being on the landmass in Texas is important to have weather conditions that are tolerable, but to do an immediate preservation of this evidence and to collect it in a professional and accurate way. Documentation is everything, and tracking of the samples that will go to many labs for chemical and mechanical and structural analysis is extremely important.
Randy Avera, former NASA engineer, we'd like you to stay close if you could as well. We would appreciate that. We appreciate having your expertise here. Let's get a recap for folks who maybe just be dipping into the story. Let's take it over to Darren Kagan. Darren?
Yeah, Miles, we're going to handle this in two ways. Of course, this is a developing story. We're going to keep moving it forward, but we do realize that there are people who are tuning in as we go, and so we do want to recap so that you know the exact amount of information we know up to this point involving the Space Shuttle Columbia. We begin with NASA's oldest shuttle. It broke up this morning as it descended over central Texas. The shuttle was on its way toward a planned landing at Kennedy Space Center in Florida. We have video to show you. It's from our affiliate WFAA in Dallas. It will show you multiple vapor trails as the shuttle was breaking up. Now, as you're watching this, the altitude was just over 200,000 feet. 7 astronauts on board. They included 6 Americans and the first Israeli ever in space, payload specialist Ilan Ramon. Debris fell over a very wide area from near the Dallas area to the Texas-Louisiana border. People as far east as Shreveport, Louisiana reported seeing and feeling an explosion as the shuttle broke apart. NASA is setting up an independent board trying to determine exactly what happened.
This is indeed a tragic day for the NASA family, for the families of the astronauts who flew on STS-107, and likewise tragic for the nation.
That from a news conference you saw live if you were with us in the last hour here on CNN, the first one that NASA has put out. They are saying another one about 3 p.m. Eastern where they will take questions. Of course, you're going to see that live right here on CNN. As we mentioned, Columbia, the oldest in the shuttle fleet, first launched back in 1981. It was on its 28th mission. We are covering this story all across the world, from Israel here to the States and across the States. And Judy Woodruff is in Washington, D.C. with more. Judy.
Thanks, Darren. We are keeping an eye on the story here very much here in Washington. With me in the studio is CNN's Patty Davis, who covers aviation for us. And Patty, you've got a little more information about what the Federal Aviation Administration is doing to collect and preserve the debris that is scattered over several states.
Well, what the Federal Aviation Administration has done is it's put in effect a temporary flight restriction over Fort Polk, Louisiana. And what it has done is anything within a 60-mile radius of Fort Polk, Louisiana, and below 3,000 feet, no planes allowed in that area. FAA trying to keep planes out of the way of anybody who may be involved in a recovery effort there for debris, trying to protect that debris and let those teams do their work and not have anybody get in the way. Also, we're told that Homeland Security Chief Tom Ridge has designated the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, as the lead agency to coordinate response and recovery of debris. Now, Ridge has called officials in Arizona and New Mexico, warning them about possible debris and trying to make sure that they preserve that debris so that this investigation can take place and they can piece together just what happened here.
Patty, it's our understanding that Tom Ridge has been contacting the governors. You mentioned Arizona, New Mexico. He's obviously also been in contact in Texas, where it's assumed the flight broke up. Oklahoma, as well as Louisiana, where you mentioned there's an effort now to restrict the airspace. We've also seen news reports of people in Arkansas who saw an explosion and presumably may see debris. So we are talking potentially 4 or 5 states involved.
We're talking a huge debris field. This shuttle appears to have broken up at about 200,000 feet in the air. Now, if you consider how far up a normal commercial aircraft normally flies, 35 to 40,000 feet, would have a wide debris field. Imagine how wide at 200,000 feet in the air these pieces would be flying. So it definitely will be a multi-state effort.
No question about it. Patty Davis, who covers aviation for us, and Patty mentioned Tom Ridge, the new director, new secretary of the new department, first secretary of the new Department of Homeland Security. Of course, so much of his attention has been focused on keeping the country safe in the aftermath of 9/11. Now, of course, he's dealing with a very different kind of tragedy, but one that will require all of his attention as well. You can imagine this happening on a Saturday morning here in Washington. This is a city tourists always flock to. One of the most, if not the most popular museum in Washington is the Air and Space Museum, part of the Smithsonian Institution. There with us on the scene is our own Bob Frank. And Bob, and I assume you've been talking to tourists and others who have to be as deeply affected by this as we are.
If not more, these were people who were coming to the Air and Space Museum. This is one of the most popular exhibits, of course. It is the Columbia Shuttle exhibit. You can see in back of me the NASA feed. You can see the replica of the shuttle in back of me, and you can see pockets of people. As the briefing was going on, there was this somber, very sad look, and of course we still have other people here who have been coming here to visit almost like they're coming to a shrine, and among them have been people from Israel. Your name, sir?
Ziv. Z-I-V. Ziv.
And tell me how you must feel.
It's a great loss. It's a tragedy. As an Israeli, I mourn and grieve with the families and the friends of the crew that was lost, of course, with the Israeli and American people. It's a bad day, but I hope in the future it'll have a more successful ending than this one.
Your country was celebrating because of the inclusion of this aspect.
That is true. Everybody was very excited back at home, and this was a very bad ending for what could have been a great day.
And among those who are here are many young people. One of the ambitions always has been to be an astronaut. How do you feel?
I think that it's a terrible loss, and I just pray for the astronauts' families that they should just, it's just a loss. And I just pray that they just be happy for him. Just be happy.
And here's your mom. How did you tell him this morning?
Well, actually, we heard about it. We were at Arlington Cemetery here, and we watched it on the news, and then we were headed over here anyway. So, like you said, it's a terrible tragedy. You know, few people take for granted. We just all of a sudden think, oh, another shuttle's gone up in the air, or something that we just take for granted anymore, and it's not something to take for granted at all.
Had your son ever expressed the desire to be an astronaut? It's almost every child's dream.
Well, they all say that at some time, but unfortunately, we had a great loss today. But we need to learn from this and move forward, I believe.
Thank you very much. And what you're hearing, of course, is very typical of the reaction you will get here. A reaction that you will get around the country, reaction around the world. Here in Washington, of course, Judy, people have a place to come to express that reaction, what amounts to, as I said, a bit of a shrine to the tragedy that occurred earlier this morning. Judy?
All right, Bob Franken at the Air and Space Museum here in Washington. And Bob, we have just learned that President Bush will address the nation from the White House, from the Cabinet Room, in just a few minutes. It's about 3 minutes before 2 Eastern Time. We're told the President will speak to the nation at 2 o'clock. Let's bring in our White House correspondent, Suzanne Malveaux, who's been at her post all morning. Suzanne, I know they've been making plans, but just now they've made the big announcement.
Well, absolutely. We saw a couple of hours ago President Bush, who arrived back here at the White House, returning from Camp David, cutting that trip short. We saw him enter the residence and then on to the Oval Office with his Chief of Staff, Andy Card. We were told that he was notified of this tragedy shortly after it happened, and at 10:30 he spoke with the director of NASA about the details of all of this. He came back to the White House to better monitor the situation. Judy, as you know, the White House, the flag here lowered at half-staff just a few hours ago, very symbolic of the tragedy here, recognizing that tragedy. As you may recall, this is really a time for comfort, to comfort the nation as well as to inform, to mourn the lost. When it was January 28th, 1986, when President Ronald Reagan had this very sad duty. He went just hours after the Challenger had exploded, and he said, I want to read this line to you. This is the last line that he delivered in his speech to the nation, saying, "We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them this morning as they prepared for their journey and waved goodbye and slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God. Clearly, this is a very important moment for the president, a need to confront, to comfort the nation, and also to talk about the sense of bravery, the sense of dedication that these people had aboard the shuttle. We have also learned that the president has spoken with Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. As you know, one of those aboard the shuttle was an Israeli citizen, giving his condolences, passing that along to Israel as well. Judy?
Suzanne, you are absolutely right. This is one of the most important jobs, functions that a president can perform. Not only is the president the leader of the country, the one who is the making decisions day in and day out, but the president must be the consoler-in-chief at a time like this, a time of great loss, of great tragedy. And you do remind us of the role that President Reagan played. In 1986, the nation shocked, because at that time it was the first space accident in something like 20 years. America was completely rocked back on its heels by the idea that there would be astronauts lost in space. And I remember, because I was covering the Challenger explosion then. I was working for the public broadcasting system for PBS, and President Reagan's remarks played an enormous role in holding the country and bringing the country together. And the line that you quoted, slipping the surly bonds of earth, is one that I think all of us remember. I have every reason to believe that President Bush and the people around him remember that and are acutely aware of the important role that the president plays at a time like this. Again, it is just after 2 o'clock Eastern Time. We are expecting any moment to hear from President Bush. He will be addressing the nation from the cabinet room there in the White House. Suzanne, when this happened, the president was at Camp David, planning to spend the weekend there after a very difficult week dealing with Iraq.
Absolutely, Judy. This is really a pivotal weekend for the president. As you know, Secretary of State Colin Powell to go before the United Nations Security Council on Wednesday to present the case against Saddam Hussein, additional evidence. This administration under a great deal of pressure from some U.S. allies who want to see more information, more evidence that would justify the possibility of using military action against Saddam Hussein. Already the president really having quite a full plate this weekend. I should also mention as well, Judy, just kind of a sign of the times, one of the assumptions that so many people made when they first saw that this shuttle was missing, that they had lost contact, was terrorism. That was something that people were thinking about. In 1986, that was not necessarily the first thought on everyone's mind. Clearly, this White House, as well as many people, aware of the possibilities of the danger, but senior administration officials telling us there is no indication that that was the cause of this tragedy today. Judy?
All right, Suzanne, as we said, we are waiting for President Bush to speak to the nation from the White House, from the cabinet room. And again, as we wait for his remarks, my colleague Miles O'Brien, who's been with us all morning. Miles, even at this moment, I have a sense that there was an enormous reluctance in 1986 when the Challenger exploded. For people, nobody even wanted to think about going back into space again at that point. But you do have the sense now that Americans have somehow, as horrible as this is, we have somehow come to the realization that space flight is dangerous. We will lose people from time to time. No one is saying we won't go into space again.
Well, let's remember who was aboard Challenger. Krista McAuliffe, civilian, teacher. That launch, that tragedy was witnessed by school children all across this country. It was devastating for so many people, and particularly for children. And there was a certain poignance to that, which made it a little more difficult, I think, for people to handle. The sense of a civilian on board that shuttle not fully appreciating the risks. In this case, a crew completely made up of test pilot types, engineers, career astronauts who fully understand the risks. Perhaps that has something to do with it. Perhaps the fact that school children the world over were not necessarily witnessing what we just saw this morning. Perhaps that changes things. As we look at Mission Control Houston, this is a remarkable scene here. You're seeing the good people of NASA, whose job it is to watch a space shuttle while it is in orbit from those consoles. Every last little technical item on a shuttle has a readout on a screen down here so that they know precisely what is going on at any given moment. Someone asked me earlier, is there a black box on the shuttle? That room is the black box. There's a constant stream of data to that room, giving them a full sense of what's happening to every last piece, every last system of a space shuttle. Right now, that team, which has spent the better part of the morning collecting its data, gathering up its data in order to prepare for an investigation, is now ready for what we are ready for, which is the President of the United States, who has returned to the White House, will be addressing those good folks at NASA who work so hard to make space travel, while risky, a reasonable thing to do, and the rest of the nation. Let's listen to the President.
My fellow Americans, this day has brought terrible news and great sadness to our country. At 9 o'clock this morning, Mission Control in Houston lost contact with our space shuttle Columbia. A short time later, debris was seen falling from the skies above Texas. The Columbia is lost. There are no survivors. On board was a crew of 7. Colonel Rick Husband, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Anderson, Commander Laurel Clark, Captain David Brown, Commander William McCool, Dr. Kulpna Shavla, and Ilan Ramon, a colonel in the Israeli Air Force. These men and women assumed great risk in the service to all humanity. In an age when space flight has come to seem almost routine, it is easy to overlook the dangers of travel by rocket and the difficulties of navigating the fierce outer atmosphere of the Earth. These astronauts knew the dangers, and they faced them willingly, knowing they had a high and noble purpose in life. Because of their courage and daring and idealism, we will miss them all the more. All Americans today are thinking as well of the families of these men and women who have been given this sudden shock and grief. You're not alone. Our entire nation grieves with you. And those you loved will always have the respect and gratitude of this country. The cause in which they died will continue. Mankind is led into the darkness beyond our world by the inspiration of discovery and the longing to understand. Our journey into space will go on. In the skies today, we saw destruction and tragedy. Yet farther than we can see, there is comfort and hope. In the words of the prophet Isaiah, lift your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all these? He who brings out the starry hosts one by one and calls them each by name. Because of his great power and mighty strength, not one of them is missing. The same Creator who names the stars also knows the names of the 7 souls we mourn today. The crew of the shuttle Columbia did not return safely to Earth, yet we can pray that all are safely home. May God bless the grieving families, and may God continue to bless America.
President Bush, after returning from Camp David to the White House. Oh, he's coming back. Let's listen in. All right, we've obviously lost the signal from the president, and we'll try to figure out what that's all about in just a bit. But we know they didn't return safely to Earth, he said, but we know they are home. President Bush touching a chord today of sympathy for the family members who lost their loved ones. In Mission Control, they stood at rapt attention for the president as he addressed the nation and addressed them. They, too, feeling the loss there as we look at the scene there at Mission Control. Judy Woodruff, difficult thing for a president to address a nation at this moment, isn't it?
It certainly is. And Miles, you know, right now, coming in the midst of the crisis the United States faces, the decision the president faces with regard to whether to go to war with Iraq, this was the last thing, I think, on the minds of, in all fairness, of the people who work with the president closely day in and day out. Of course, it was the last thing on all of our minds. Everyone has come to assume once again over the last 17 years that space flight is as safe as it possibly can be. We are reminded again today that it is subject to error of what kind we don't know. But this is a day when the presidents, I think it's fair to say, earn their pay, because he had to make those calls to the families of the 7 astronauts, which has to be the hardest thing that any president ever has to do. You know, if you read anything of history, you know the presidents who speak to the widows of those lost in combat. It is a job that none of us would covet.
Indeed, indeed. Finding the right words and hearkening back to those words of Ronald Reagan, which are as poignant today as they were in 1986. We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them this morning as they prepared for the journey and waved goodbye and slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God. George W. Bush, using the same sorts of parallels and symbolism and analogy and reference to faith at this terrible moment of tragedy and mourning here in the United States as it becomes evident that the Space Shuttle Columbia and her crew of 7 is now lost. Let's listen in one more time to that moment in Mission Control, that last transmission. Everything seemed to be going routine. You'll hear the voice of James Hartsfield, Public Affairs Officer for NASA in Houston, as well as some air-to-ground communication. At the other end in the shuttle is Rick Husband, the commander of the Space Shuttle. Let's listen in on that.
Toward Florida, now approaching the New Mexico-Texas border. Altitude 40 miles. Speed 13,200 miles per hour. Range to touchdown 1,400 miles. The shuttle in the left bank with wings angled about 57 degrees to horizontal.
And Columbia, Houston, we see your tire pressure messages, and we did not copy your last.
Roger.
Half-staff at the White House. A nation begins a period of mourning for the crew of the Space Shuttle Columbia. 7 brave astronauts pushing the envelope, exploring the high frontier, and then inexplicably it all ends in an instant, 200,000 feet above the state of Texas. Before they left, I spoke with the first Israeli astronaut ever to travel to space, Ilan Ramon.
To tell you the truth, it was pretty fast. It was actually today, and it went too fast. It was partly or mostly cloudy, so I couldn't see much of just the north of Israel, and of course, I was excited.
Ilan Ramon, that was obviously while he was in flight. I apologize for that. That was the Saturday after launch. He was telling me what it was like to try to look down on his home country of Israel. Said he had a little difficulty finding it. Ultimately, he did get a good chance to see it and conducted a series of experiments, among other things, to test the links between dust particles in the air, and global warming. Rick Husband was on his second flight, his first as a commander, and he talked a little bit about flying with Ilan Ramon.
Personally, the thing that I have really enjoyed the most about Ilan and his family is just their warmness and the openness that they have in sharing their home. And from my standpoint also, just learning more about Israel, learning more about, I'd say, the Jewish culture. And with myself, being a Christian, I take a specific interest in kind of the biblical or spiritual aspect as well, which has been a very interesting thing for me.
Rick Husband, as he referred to there, a devout Christian, learning a little bit about Judaism through the eyes of Ilan Ramon. Ilan Ramon and his crewmate on this mission, which was oft delayed. Series of problems with the shuttle and scheduling issues. Other missions took priority to the International Space Station. This mission finally taking off some 16 days ago and going up until that point at 9 a.m. Eastern Time this morning, up until that point, nearly flawlessly for the 7-person crew as they conducted a series of experiments, some 80 experiments in all, over the course of this 16-day mission. NASA is in the early stages of its investigation already. As you look at this tape from WFAA, shot from Dallas, you can see what happens. What seems like a single streaky meteor quickly becomes 3, 4, 5 meteors as the Space Shuttle Columbia breaks up in midair, traveling 18 times the speed of sound at an altitude of some 40 miles above us. And that picture tells you what happened, but offers up many, many questions to us at this hour as to what could have happened, what might have caused it. A whole series of things will be discussed and looked at. And as one of the people we talked to earlier mentioned, an engineer who was involved in the Challenger investigation, no one in the early stages of Challenger could have anticipated that it came down to a rubber O-ring that was too brittle and thus allowed hot gases to spill from those solid rocket boosters on the side of the space shuttle, spill into the external tank and cause an explosion in there. That's ultimately what happened. At the initial stages after Challenger, they were looking at the main engines and something there. So it took some time for them to come up with that whole scenario. Eventually it was found, eventually it was fixed, and eventually they flew. It took the better part, two years, almost really 3 years, before the return to flight of the Space Shuttle Discovery. And that is probably the kind of time frame that we're going to be talking about here as the NASA and the country endeavors to find out precisely what happened to the Space Shuttle Columbia before any other shuttle leaves the launch pad at the Kennedy Space Center. Let's get a recap now from Darren in the newsroom. Darren?
All right, Miles, we're going to do a couple things here. We're going to do that recap, and we're also going to talk to some of the people who saw the shuttle or some of the debris coming down. First, a recap of today's tragic events, beginning with Space Shuttle Columbia making its descent to Earth. It broke up over Texas this morning. It was planned to land at Kennedy Space Center in Florida. When you look at the video, you can see fiery pieces falling from the shuttle. This is very much like the video that Miles was just showing you. As we're also watching from NASA lost contact with the shuttle around 9 a.m. Eastern. The shuttle, as you're watching it, was about 200,000 feet and traveling at speeds of 12,000 miles per hour when contact was lost. Government officials say terrorism is not suspected. The shuttle was simply too far away from Earth for that to take place. Debris from the shuttle rained down over east central Texas, and it goes all the way into Louisiana. Officials are warning that the debris could be hazardous and should be avoided, and they are certainly urging residents who find debris to immediately contact authorities. Do not go near it. Do not touch it. Of course, we cannot forget the astronauts who lost their lives. 7 crew members aboard the shuttle were killed. NASA says their families at this point in time are definitely getting support.
I'd have to say the families are bearing up with an incredible amount of dignity considering their loss. We all grieve for them. We all pray with them for the crew. But one thing came across loud and clear when visiting with them is they knew that the crew was absolutely dedicated to the mission that they were performing. And I think you could see that in the video downlink. They believed in what they were doing. And in the conversations with the crew and their families, they said that we must find what happened and fix it and move on. And we can't let their sacrifice be in vain.
7 incredible astronauts on board the shuttle. Let's go ahead and put a face on the crew. Rick Husband was a 45-year-old commander of the Columbia crew. He also was an Air Force colonel. He comes from Amarillo, Texas. He says he made up his mind as a child that he would be an astronaut. It was his lifelong dream. Husband was selected as an astronaut back in 1994. Talk about perseverance. It took 4 tries until he was accepted into the astronaut program. William McCool was the pilot of Columbia and a Navy commander. He also comes from Texas, Lubbock, Texas. He was born in San Diego and was the father of 3 sons. McCool became an astronaut in 1996. He was making his first space flight. The payload commander, Michael Anderson, was 43 years old. He also was an Air Force lieutenant colonel who was born in Plattsburgh, New York. NASA selected Anderson back in 1994. He was one of only a handful of African-American astronauts. Kalpana Chawla was 41 years old. She is a very interesting story. She was born in Karnal, India. She immigrated to the U.S. in the 1980s. She became an astronaut in 1994. This was her second space flight. She is a national heroine back in her home country of India. David Brown was a 46-year-old Navy pilot and doctor. He was also a Navy captain. He was born in Arlington, Virginia. He joined the Navy after a medical internship. He became an astronaut in 1996, and Columbia was his first mission. Dr. Laurel Blair Salton Clark, she was the other woman on board. She, also 41 years old, a Navy commander and a flight surgeon. She became an astronaut in 1996. She lived in Racine, Wisconsin. She has an 8-year-old son. And then Ilan Ramon, Israel's first astronaut, a hero in his country. Ramon was a colonel in Israel's Air Force. His ancestors survived the Nazi death camp in Auschwitz. His wife and his 4 children live in Tel Aviv. And now we go back to exactly what took place early this morning. A lot of people saw what took place in the Texas area and then saw the debris rain down from Texas all the way to the Louisiana border, as we mentioned. Mark Davis is a talk radio host. He's in Dallas, Texas, and he's joining us on the phone right now. Mark is WPBN. Mark, thank you for joining us on this day.
Hi, no problem. WBAB in Dallas-Fort Worth, and it was in this area over North Texas, obviously, in the video imagery that people are seeing right now. This is what it looked like. There's not a whole lot of zoom that's on this particular video image, so I and some of my neighbors were out in our respective front yards engaging in a pretty normal space geek activity, watching a shuttle come in on the rare occasions that it appears over the North American skies. And just juxtaposing it with the last time we had this experience, it was a nighttime event about 10 o'clock in the evening, and far less of the sky was involved. It went from about 30 degrees up in the horizon, pretty well straight down to the southern horizon. This was a full 90 degrees of sky. The first bright sparkle of the shuttle re-entering came just exactly 8 o'clock our time, Central Time, and right above our heads. And then moving very slowly, taking every bit of a minute to go all the way down low in the southeastern sky on its way, of course, to Florida. The first difference, if anybody had seen any of these before, lucky enough to be out when a shuttle re-entry was in the sky before, is that it's usually a fairly clearly drawn single line of fire. This is, of course, a fireball in the sky any time a spacecraft re-enters the atmosphere. But to have sparkly things come off it was not immediately an item of panic, because anybody who's seen Apollo 13, where the special effects were quite competent, knows that things are going to fly off of a spacecraft that's re-entering the atmosphere. But would those things be so big that you could see them from 38 miles below? Would these things be so big that they would create their own separate contrail? Well, obviously the answers to that would be no, and that resulted in the wreckage that you guys are showing right now.
So, Mark, let me just jump here in a second and ask you, as you said, you're a self-professed space geek, a number of your neighborhood, so you had gone out to watch this re-entry, and you described what you thought it should have looked like from previous re-entries that you had watched. But at what point did you and your neighbors, as you were watching this, get a sense that something definitely was not right?
Well, it's kind of funny. To our interested but still relatively untrained eyes, The moment at which it was pretty clear that something bad was happening is after we all finished up a little conversation, said, wow, wasn't that neat, put our cameras and binoculars away, came back in, grabbed a refill of the pot of coffee, fired up CNN, and it wasn't landing. I mean, this is how fast this thing goes. At 12,000 miles an hour, it's directly over our heads in the Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas area at 8, due on the ground in Florida at 8:16. I was probably back in my house at about 8:10. I figured this is great. Shuttle landings have become so routine, as you well know. I'm sure your coverage plans this morning called for joining it a couple of minutes out from landing, where it's a little white speck, then it lands, everybody says that's great, and then you're back to, last night's basketball scores. Well, obviously it was not a normal landing, and there was no landing to cover, so that was when my phone starts ringing off the hook. I start calling everybody, and it's time to head in here to WBAP to do some coverage of our own.
Interesting, just to watch it by itself, you didn't really realize at the particular moment that something had gone so terribly wrong.
Well, no, and that's what's so different between now and almost exactly 17 years ago with the Shuttle Challenger. I was up early to watch that, too, which probably... it's funny, the Challenger launch had a little bit of layperson interest because you had Krista McAuliffe, first teacher in space, so the ratings for that, for you guys and everybody else, were probably a smidgen higher than for the ordinary routine shuttle launch. For the Shuttle Challenger, the shuttle program had existed for about 5 years. Now it's existed for 2 decades. These flights are as normal as a jetliner taking off from your local airport. But yeah, we were there, and we were going to watch whatever coverage you guys provided. And when it became clear there was no landing to cover, all those feelings from 1986 are back. And Darren, I know covering it, and for us covering it here in Texas on radio, everything old is new again. Reagan's speech in 86, his biblical or godly references juxtaposed with President Bush's.
Mark, I'm sorry, I'm just going to kind of jump in here. Of course, you understand covering there from Texas. We do have a lot of other news to get in as we try to move the story forward. Thank you for joining us so much from Texas. Mark Davis, talk show radio host. Thank you so much. Now we want to move it up to Washington, D.C. and Judy Woodruff. Judy?
Thanks, Darren. Getting a sense from Mr. Davis, the perspective of so many different perspectives this morning. Somebody who lives in the state of Texas and works in the news media. Darren, with us now, or somebody who will be with us in just a moment, was literally, I think you have to say, the face and the voice of space flight in the United States during the 1960s and the 1970s. Really the beginning of the space program in our country, when we were all excited. School children would gather around to watch on television for every space flight that took off. He is none other than Walter Cronkite, a former CBS news anchor who's been retired now for some years, but has always maintained an interest in space flight, has over the years, as I said, his name literally became synonymous with NASA, with following so many of the earliest space flights. If we saw it, we watched CBS, we watched Walter Cronkite. So CNN wanted to talk with Walter Cronkite, and he will be joining us now in just a moment. We're just pulling all the technical pieces together to get Mr. Cronkite on the air with us. And while we wait for that, he's going to be joining us from Manhattan. We want to go to Jerusalem, to Israel, the home country of one of the astronauts on this Space Shuttle Columbia mission. Joining us is Renan Geeson. He is a spokesman for the Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. Mr. Geeson, we know President Bush called your Prime Minister just a short time ago. Can you tell us anything about their conversation?
Well, first of all, let me just say this is a very tragic and mournful day for the people of the United States, for the people of Israel, for the families of the astronauts, and but also a very sad day for all of humanity. And I think that was reflected in a conversation between President Bush and Prime Minister Sharon, which just took place a short while ago. The President said that it's a tragic day for science, it's a tragic day to the astronauts, and mentioned that on that space shuttle there was one brave Israeli citizen, Colonel Ilan Ramon, who has also died in this endeavor on behalf of all humanity. And he offered his personal condolences, as well as the condolences of the American people, to the family of Ramon and to the Israeli people. The Prime Minister reiterated and offered his sincere condolences to the families of the astronauts, and also said in his final words, he said that it's on these difficult and hard moments that the hearts of the American people and the hearts of the Israeli people are bound together. And at these difficult moments, we're holding hands together, and together we pray.
No question about it. Mr. Geeson, this question has been asked to some of your countrymen already today, but I want to ask you, what does it mean, what has it meant to Israel to have, for the first time, one of the astronauts aboard an American shuttle?
Well, you know, it's not just a question of personal ambitions and personal pride, or I would say national pride that we have an astronaut there. But I think it's a reflection of the shared values that we share with the people of the United States. This is the quest for the stars.